The storm that changed everything, how a struggling woman and a wealthy CEO fell deeply in love. Hello, precious souls. Welcome back to Dear Love Diaries, where every story whispers directly to your heart. Can you feel that connection between us? That invisible thread that brings us together time and again? I'm so grateful you've returned to our little sanctuary of love stories. Each one of you adds something irreplaceable to this community, your comments, your experiences, your beautiful energy that radiates through the screen. You know, I wake up each morning thankful for this journey we're on together. This isn't just a channel, it's a gathering place for those who believe in the power of love to transform lives, just like the story I'm about to share with you today. Whether you're a longtime member of our Dear Love family or this is your first time joining us, know that you belong here. You matter here. Your own love story, with all its twists and turns, matters here. So settle in, as we open another chapter from the Diaries of Love. Today's story reminded me of why I started this channel in the first place, to celebrate how love finds us in the most unexpected ways, often when we need it most but expect it least. Are you ready? Let's begin this journey together. Riverside District had always lived up to its name, nestled against the banks of the Westland River that curved through the city like a sleeping snake. Once a thriving industrial area, decades of economic decline had transformed it into what city officials euphemistically called a developing neighborhood. What they meant was poor, predominantly black, and perpetually last on the infrastructure improvement list. Every time it rained heavily, the antiquated drainage systems backed up. Streets turned into shallow pools, basements flooded, and residents mounted their well-rehearsed emergency responses. They'd been begging the city for proper flood protection for years. Their requests drowned in bureaucracy, just as their homes drowned in water. At the heart of this ongoing battle stood Zora Washington. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet dignity and fierce determination of someone who had been fighting her entire life. Today, she moved with purpose through the community center, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing emphatically though the person on the other end couldn't see. Yes, Councilman Davis, I understand budget constraints. I've heard that explanation for 3 years now. Her voice remained steady, respectful, but unyielding. What I'm saying is that the meteorologists are predicting record rainfall. Our community cannot handle another flood without some emergency measures. She listened, her expression tightening. The same excuses. The same delays. Thank you for your time, she finally said, ending the call without having secured any help. They're not sending anyone, are they? Asked Mrs. Coleman, an elderly resident who had been watching Zora with knowing eyes. Zora shook her head, allowing herself one brief moment of frustration before squaring her shoulders again. Not today. But we've weathered worse. I'll start organizing volunteers for sandbag distribution. This was Zora's life, working as a paralegal by day, taking online classes toward her law degree by night, and filling every spare moment with community organizing. Her modest apartment was wallpapered with schedules, petition signatures, and funding applications. She hardly remembered the last time she'd done something purely for herself. Each morning when she passed her mother's photograph on the bedside table, she reminded herself why. Esther Washington had died from pneumonia complications 10 years ago, complications that became fatal because the nearest hospital had closed, and the ambulance took too long navigating flooded streets during a storm. Make it matter, her mother had whispered in her final hours. And Zora had promised. Every fight for better infrastructure was a fight in her mother's memory. Across town, 20 miles and several economic brackets away, Ethan Parker studied rainfall projections on the massive screen in his corner office. At 38, he'd built Parker Developments from a small real estate investment firm into one of the city's premier development companies. Today, dressed in a custom charcoal suit that complemented his athletic build, he rubbed his clean-shaven jaw as he considered the data. The meteorologists are saying this could be the largest storm system we've seen in a decade, his assistant reported. Should we postpone tomorrow's groundbreaking ceremony? Ethan nodded, still studying the weather patterns. Yes. And contact the foundation. If these projections hold true, we should prepare a disaster response. The Parker Foundation was his passion project. The thing that made all the corporate battles and lonely nights worthwhile. Using a percentage of his company's profits, the foundation worked on community improvement projects throughout the city. Yet despite his success and his charitable work, something was missing. His last relationship had ended 6 months ago when his girlfriend had casually mentioned she'd been with him, despite his humble beginnings. It had crystallized what he'd long suspected: most people in his social circle saw him as his net worth first, and a person second. As rain began to speckle his floor-to-ceiling windows, Ethan couldn't have known that across town, Zora was organizing emergency supplies, both of them preparing for a storm that would bring more than just water. The weather alerts escalated throughout the day. What had been described as heavy rainfall in the morning was upgraded to potential flooding by afternoon and severe weather warning by evening. Zora made calls until her voice grew hoarse, arranging for community members with vehicles to help evacuate those without. She coordinated volunteer teams to distribute sandbags and emergency supplies, knowing from bitter experience that official help would be too little, too late. If you've ever experienced how unexpected events can change your life's direction, or know someone who has, hit that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Chapter 2. The first time Zora Washington had faced loss, she was just 11 years old. Her father, a construction worker with dreams of starting his own business, was crushed when a poorly maintained scaffold collapsed. The company's expensive lawyers ensured the settlement barely covered funeral expenses, leaving Esther Washington to raise Zora and her brother Darius alone. Esther worked 2 jobs, days as a hospital aide, nights cleaning office buildings. Yet somehow managed to attend every school event, check every homework assignment, and keep their modest home filled with love. She taught her children that education was the one thing nobody could take from them, and dignity wasn't something you were given, it was something you claimed, every day, through your actions. When pneumonia took Esther during a particularly vicious winter storm, something crystallized in Zora's heart. She was 22 then, already working full-time while attending community college. Her mother's death might have been prevented with better infrastructure, closer emergency services, or simply if someone in power had cared enough about their neighborhood to ensure basic services functioned properly. "You can't fix a broken system from the outside," became Zora's mantra. She funneled her grief into purpose, finishing her degree while becoming increasingly involved in community organizing. Every small victory. A repaired streetlight, a cleaned-up park, a successful petition, felt like honoring her mother's memory. Her brother Darius took a different path through the same grief. 2 years younger than Zora, he channeled his energy into physical work, becoming a skilled carpenter who could transform raw lumber into objects of both beauty and function. Where Zora sought to change the system, Darius focused on building things that would last. His protective nature extended from his sister to their entire community, his broad shoulders bearing burdens both literal and figurative. Both siblings shared a healthy skepticism toward outsiders who suddenly discovered Riverside's problems. They'd seen too many politicians making campaign stops, too many reporters parachuting in for poverty tourism, too many wealthy do-gooders whose interest evaporated when faced with systemic challenges rather than simple charity cases. Ethan Parker's childhood had been comfortable, if not extravagant. The son of a high school principal and a nurse, he grew up in a middle-class suburb with good schools and safe streets. What set him apart was a restless intelligence that saw opportunities others missed, and a work ethic that turned those opportunities into success. At 16, he started a lawn care business that became profitable enough to help pay for college. By 23, he'd parlayed a small inheritance from his grandmother into his first real estate investment. By 30, Parker Developments was managing properties worth millions. Now, at 38, his personal net worth had long since crossed into 9 figures. Yet success had come with unexpected isolation. Each rung climbed on the ladder of wealth seemed to distance him further from authentic connection. His relationships had grown increasingly superficial, beautiful women who were more interested in being seen with him than seeing him. Business associates whose friendliness was directly proportional to what he could do for them. His last serious girlfriend, Olivia Bennett, came from old money and the right social circles. For nearly a year, he'd believed they shared genuine feelings. Then he'd overheard her at a charity gala, speaking to a friend. Of course, he's new money, darling. Practically blue collar compared to Daddy. But he's surprisingly refined for someone who had to work for his fortune. The breakup had been swift but civilized. The awakening it triggered in Ethan had been profound. Though they still moved in the same social circles, each interaction with Olivia now reminded him of how easily people could be reduced to their usefulness or status. Only Patricia Thornton seemed to see beyond his balance sheet. 20 years his senior and one of his earliest investors, Patricia had become both mentor and friend. "You've built an empire," she told him over lunch shortly after his breakup with Olivia. "But what's an empire worth if you're ruling alone?" Her words had stayed with him, prompting him to channel more energy into the Parker Foundation. If he couldn't find personal fulfillment, at least his success could create meaningful change. Yet even his philanthropic efforts felt somehow hollow. Writing checks and attending galas created distance between himself and the actual communities he hoped to help. As the storm clouds gathered over the city, Zora and Ethan stood as representatives of worlds that rarely intersected meaningfully. She, carrying the weight of community responsibility and personal loss, fighting for every small improvement with tenacity and heart. He, surrounded by material abundance but searching for something genuine, something real that money couldn't buy. Neither could have imagined that within hours, the carefully constructed boundaries between their worlds would be washed away by forces stronger than social convention, stronger than prejudice, stronger even than their own deeply held beliefs about who they were and what they deserved from life. Chapter 3. The storm announced itself with a low, distant rumble that vibrated through the floorboards of homes across the city. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to an ominous charcoal gray, casting a premature twilight over Riverside District. Wind whipped through the streets, bending trees and sending loose debris skittering across pavement. Zora's phone buzzed constantly with weather alerts and messages from community members. The National Weather Service had upgraded their warning: severe flooding expected. Seek higher ground immediately. "Darius, we need to move faster," Zora called to her brother as they loaded emergency supplies into his truck. "Weather Service just issued an evacuation advisory." Darius's expression hardened. Advisory doesn't mean much if people have nowhere to go and no way to get there. He slammed the tailgate closed with more force than necessary. "I'll take Mrs. Coleman and the Jacksons to the high school shelter. You finish your calls." Rain began to fall, fat, heavy drops that seemed to explode on impact. Within minutes, it transformed into sheets of water pounding against windows and rooftops with unnatural force. The storm drains, inadequate on the best of days, quickly began to overflow. Across town, Ethan sat at the head of a gleaming conference table surrounded by his executive team and foundation directors. The massive wall screen displayed radar images of the storm system, a swirling mass of angry red and purple sweeping across the region. "The city's emergency management team is focusing on downtown and the eastern suburbs," reported James Chen, his foundation director. "Based on previous patterns, Riverside and the western industrial area will be low priority for official response." Ethan frowned. "What resources do we have available?" 3 emergency response vehicles, portable generators, water purification systems. "We've prepared relief packages with food, water, flashlights, and first aid supplies." "Get them deployed now," Ethan decided. "Coordinate with local community leaders if possible." "And James, I want to go with the first team." The room fell silent. Patricia Thornton, attending via video conference, raised an eyebrow. "Ethan, we have trained personnel for that." I know. But I'm tired of making decisions from behind desks. I want to see the situation firsthand. As the meeting adjourned, Ethan's phone lit up with a text from Olivia, "Charity gala still on tomorrow night despite the storm. Expecting you there." He slipped the phone into his pocket without responding. Some priorities had become crystal clear. The rain fell harder. Streets became streams, then rivers. In Riverside, the water rose with frightening speed, flowing into homes and businesses, carrying away cars and dumpsters as if they were toys in a bathtub. Zora waded through knee-deep water, guiding a family with 3 small children toward higher ground. Her jeans and jacket were soaked through, her braids plastered against her skull, but she moved with determined efficiency. "The community center is 3 blocks that way," she shouted over the storm's roar, pointing. "My brother is bringing a truck back for more evacuations. Just keep moving and stay together." The young mother nodded gratefully, clutching her smallest child to her chest while her husband held the hands of the 2 older ones. Zora watched until they turned the corner before heading to her next stop. Mrs. Peterson lived alone in a small house at the lowest point of Riverside. At 87, with limited mobility and no family nearby, she was exactly the sort of person who fell through the cracks during disasters. Zora had tried calling several times with no answer. The water was waist-deep by the time she reached Peterson Street. The current pulled at her legs, making each step a battle. Wind-driven rain stung her face like needles, reducing visibility to mere feet. Debris floated past, branches, trash cans, a child's abandoned bicycle. Mrs. Peterson's house appeared dark, but Zora knew the power had likely gone out hours ago. She called out as she waded up what had once been a front yard. "Mrs. Peterson. It's Zora Washington. We need to evacuate you." No response came from the darkened house. Zora reached the porch steps, grateful for the slight elevation that brought the water level down to her knees. She pounded on the door. "Mrs. Peterson. Are you in there?" A faint voice responded, barely audible above the storm. "Zora? The water's coming in. I can't get to the door." Zora tried the knob. Locked. Without hesitation, she picked up a flower pot and smashed it against the nearest window, then cleared away the glass with her jacket sleeve. She hoisted herself through the opening, landing in what had once been Mrs. Peterson's living room. Water swirled around her calves, rising visibly even as she stood there. She found the elderly woman in her bedroom, perched atop her mattress, clutching a small suitcase and a framed photograph. "My husband built this house," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice surprisingly calm. 57 years we lived here. And you'll come back to it," Zora promised, helping her up. "But right now we have to get you somewhere safe." They made it to the front room when a terrible cracking sound split the air. Zora looked up just as a section of ceiling collapsed, bringing a torrent of water with it. The sudden rush knocked them both off balance. Zora managed to keep hold of Mrs. Peterson, but the current pulled them apart from the window she'd entered through. Water continued to pour in, rising at a terrifying rate. The front door had jammed against the frame, swollen from moisture. Within minutes, the water reached Zora's chest, then her shoulders. Mrs. Peterson, considerably shorter, clung to Zora's neck, whimpering softly. They were trapped. Have you ever found yourself in a crisis situation that changed everything? Share your experience in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, give this video a thumbs up so others can find it too. Chapter 4. Ethan Parker had never seen anything like it. The Parker Foundation's emergency response SUV pushed through streets that had become canals, the vehicle's elevated chassis barely keeping the undercarriage above the roiling water. Windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge as lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the devastation in stark, white flashes. "Sir, with all due respect, we should turn back," shouted Marco, the Foundation's head of emergency response, from the driver's seat. The water's getting too deep. We've delivered the supplies to the main shelter, let the professionals handle individual rescues. Ethan's eyes scanned the flooded landscape. In the distance, he could see the flashing lights of fire trucks and police vehicles, but they were concentrated at the community center. Entire blocks remained untouched by emergency services. There, Ethan pointed suddenly, leaning forward. Someone's waving from that window. Marco squinted through the rain-streaked glass. I don't see. Another flash of lightning revealed a small house with water nearly reaching its windows. An elderly woman pressed against the glass, frantically waving what appeared to be a white pillowcase. Get as close as you can, Ethan instructed, already reaching for the waterproof bag containing emergency equipment. Mr. Parker, you can't go out in that current, Marco protested. We should call it in. By the time help arrives, that house could be completely underwater. Ethan pulled on a life vest. I was a lifeguard through college. I can reach her. Before Marco could argue further, Ethan had opened the door, the force of the wind nearly ripping it from his grasp. The water immediately soaked him to the skin, shockingly cold despite the summer heat. The current pulled at his legs as he waded toward the house, a safety line from the vehicle secured around his waist. Each step required all his strength. Debris swirled past, occasionally striking his legs with bruising force. The distance to the house, perhaps 30 yards, felt like miles. When he finally reached it, the water had risen higher, the woman's face now clearly visible through the window, her expression a mixture of terror and desperate hope. I'm going to break the glass. Ethan shouted, gesturing for her to move back. He pulled a rescue hammer from his belt and struck the window, creating a hole that he quickly enlarged with his protected arm. There's another person, the elderly woman cried as soon as the opening was large enough to hear through. She came to save me, but we got trapped. The water's up to her neck in the front room. Ethan's heart thudded against his ribs. 2 people. The rescue had just become significantly more complicated. I'm coming in, he called, making the opening larger before pulling himself through. The interior of the house was a nightmare of swirling water and floating furniture. The elderly woman stood on what appeared to be a floating mattress, clutching a wooden headboard. Where's the other person? Ethan asked urgently. Front room, the woman pointed with a trembling hand. She was trying to get the door open when the ceiling came down. Ethan waded through the submerged living room, the water now chest-high and rising. Overturned furniture created dangerous obstacles beneath the surface. Then he saw her, a woman with dark braided hair, pressed into a corner where 2 walls met, desperately trying to maintain her position as the water level climbed past her shoulders. She held something small above her head, a phone, perhaps, or a wallet. Their eyes met across the churning water. In that instant, something electric passed between them, recognition, not of faces, but of spirits. Here was someone else who ran toward danger rather than away from it. Someone whose first instinct was to help. Hold on. Ethan called, fighting his way toward her. I'm going to get you out. The woman's expression shifted from momentary hope to fierce determination. Take her first, she insisted, nodding toward the elderly woman. She can't swim. I'm not leaving you, Ethan replied, the certainty in his voice surprising even himself. I'm not asking. The woman's tone left no room for argument despite her precarious position. Get her to safety. Then come back if you can. Their eyes locked again, a silent battle of wills in the midst of chaos. Ethan saw the steel in her gaze, the unwavering commitment to putting others first. It humbled him and awakened something long dormant in his soul. I'll be back, he promised. Keep your head above water. She nodded once, adjusting her position as the water crept higher. Getting Mrs. Peterson through the window and to the waiting vehicle was a harrowing ordeal. The current had strengthened, and the small woman's terror made her rigid, hard to maneuver. By the time Ethan handed her to Marco at the SUV, precious minutes had passed. "There's another person," he shouted. "I'm going back." "Ethan, the house is going to collapse," Marco warned, pointing to where the structure visibly sagged on one side. But Ethan had already turned away, fighting the current with renewed urgency. The safety line, still secured around his waist, played out behind him like a lifeline to a world that suddenly seemed far less important than the one waiting in the flooded house. When he reached the window again, his heart stopped. The water had risen to the ceiling. The woman was nowhere to be seen. For one terrible moment, he thought he was too late. Then a hand broke the surface near the window, fingers grasping at air. Without hesitation, Ethan plunged through the opening, diving beneath the murky water. The darkness was complete, visibility zero. He felt his way through the submerged room, lungs burning, until his fingers brushed against fabric, then an arm. He pulled, kicking powerfully toward what he hoped was the window. They surfaced together in a rush of desperate gasping. Her arms came around his neck automatically, her body shaking with cold and exertion. "I've got you," he said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't name. "I've got you." Her eyes opened, meeting his with a clarity that seemed impossible given their circumstances. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered. Together, they made their way through the window, into the raging storm, and into a future neither could have imagined before this moment. Chapter 5. The high school gymnasium had been transformed into an emergency shelter, its polished floors now covered with cots, blankets, and exhausted evacuees. The squeak of wet shoes on hardwood mingled with murmured conversations and occasional announcements over the PA system. Harsh fluorescent lights cast everyone in a pallid glow that did nothing to improve the somber mood. Zora sat on a metal folding chair, a scratchy emergency blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her sodden clothes had been replaced with donated sweatpants and a faded t-shirt that hung loosely on her frame. Her braids were still damp, leaving dark patches on the shirt's shoulders. Despite her ordeal, she moved with purpose among the evacuees, checking on neighbors, coordinating volunteers, refusing to acknowledge her own exhaustion. Ethan watched her from across the room, similarly changed into dry clothes, jeans and a plain blue Henley that his foundation kept in emergency kits. Without his tailored suit and carefully maintained appearance, he looked different. More approachable, perhaps. More human. He approached her as she finished speaking with an elderly couple, offering them reassurances about medication supplies that would arrive by morning. "You should be resting," he said, his voice soft but concern evident. "You nearly drowned a few hours ago." Zora turned, recognition flashing in her eyes. Without the chaos of the flood and the darkness of the storm between them, she took in his appearance fully for the first time: tall, athletic build, sandy brown hair now slightly mussed, eyes a striking blue against his fair skin. In different circumstances, she might have found him handsome. Right now, she was too exhausted to think beyond the crisis at hand. "There's too much to do for resting," she replied, her tone not unkind but matter-of-fact. "But I haven't thanked you properly. I'm Zora Washington." She extended her hand. "Ethan Parker." He took her hand, noticing how small it seemed in his own, yet how strong her grip was. "And you don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." A small, tired smile touched her lips. "We both know that's not true. But I appreciate the sentiment." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two strangers connected by an intense shared experience that made small talk seem impossible yet meaningful conversation too intimate. "Mrs. Peterson?" Zora finally asked. "The woman I was with?" "She's fine. Medical checked her out, no injuries, just exhaustion and mild hypothermia. Her niece arrived about an hour ago to stay with her." Relief softened Zora's features. "Thank God. She's lived in that house since before I was born. Losing it will be hard enough without physical trauma too." Before Ethan could respond, a tall, broad-shouldered man with Zora's same deep brown eyes and determined expression approached, his gaze alternating between concern for his sister and wariness toward Ethan. "Darius," Zora said, obvious affection in her voice. "This is Ethan Parker. He's the one who pulled me out of Mrs. Peterson's house." Darius sized Ethan up with a look that conveyed both gratitude and suspicion. "Thank you," he said finally, extending a hand roughened by physical labor. "My sister has a habit of putting herself in danger for others." "Seems like a family trait," Ethan replied, noticing the mud caking Darius's clothes and the exhaustion lining his face. "Have you been out in the rescue efforts as well?" "Someone has to. Official help took their sweet time getting here." There was no mistaking the bitterness in Darius's voice. "Same as always." "Darius," Zora said softly, a gentle warning in her tone. "It's all right," Ethan said. "He's not wrong." Something in Ethan's simple acknowledgement caused both siblings to look at him with slightly altered expressions, still cautious, but with a new layer of curiosity. "You're not from Riverside," Darius stated, more observation than question. "No. I'm with the Parker Foundation. We brought emergency supplies." Ethan deliberately omitted his position as CEO and founder, sensing that such information would create an immediate barrier. "Parker Foundation," Zora repeated, recognition dawning. "The development company?" "Same family name, yes," Ethan admitted, watching her expression carefully. A flicker of something, disappointment, crossed her face. "So this is what? Good PR during a crisis?" The accusation stung, but Ethan understood its source. "The foundation operates independently from the development side. But I won't pretend there's no connection. I just wanted to help." Zora studied him for a long moment, as if trying to reconcile the man who had risked his life to save hers with her preconceptions about wealthy developers. Finally, she nodded. "Well, if you want to help, we could use those supplies distributed efficiently. The city emergency management team means well, but they don't know our community, who needs what, where to prioritize." Ethan recognized the olive branch for what it was. "Tell me where to start." As they began to work side by side, organizing supplies and coordinating volunteers, something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet. But a tentative respect built on shared purpose rather than the adrenaline of rescue. And if their fingers occasionally brushed as they passed supplies back and forth, if their eyes held contact a moment longer than necessary, neither acknowledged the subtle current that had begun to flow between them, a current as persistent and ultimately as powerful as the floodwaters that had brought them together. Chapter 6. 3 days after the flood, Ethan returned to Riverside. The water had receded, leaving behind a wasteland of mud, debris, and devastation. Homes stood with water lines marking their walls like bruises. Possessions, furniture, clothing, photographs, toys, lay ruined along curbs in soggy piles that represented lifetimes of memories. He found Zora exactly where he expected. At the center of recovery efforts, coordinating volunteers in the cleanup of Mrs. Coleman's small bungalow. Dressed in work boots, jeans, and a faded t-shirt, her hair pulled back beneath a bandana, she looked nothing like the corporate partners he usually worked with. Yet something about her commanding presence reminded him of the most effective CEOs he knew, natural leadership that inspired others to follow. She looked up as he approached, surprise briefly crossing her features before her expression settled into cautious welcome. "Mr. Parker. I didn't expect to see you again." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "And I said I'd help, didn't I?" "People say a lot of things during crises," she replied, handing him a pair of work gloves. "Actions afterward tell the real story." He accepted the gloves with a nod, understanding the test being offered. "Where do you need me?" For hours, they worked side by side in the summer heat, hauling waterlogged drywall and insulation to growing piles of debris. Ethan fell into a rhythm with the local volunteers, learning names, sharing brief stories, earning tentative smiles with his willingness to tackle the dirtiest jobs without complaint. Around noon, when Darius arrived with a truck full of donated lunches from a local restaurant, he raised an eyebrow at finding Ethan still there, covered in sweat and mud like everyone else. "You're still around," Darius commented, handing Ethan a sandwich and bottle of water. "Looks that way," Ethan replied, too tired for pretense. "Thanks for this." "Don't thank me. Community donations." Darius hesitated, then added, "But you're welcome all the same." They ate in companionable silence, watching as Zora organized the next phase of cleanup with quiet efficiency. When she finally took her own lunch break, she settled beside them on the curb, wincing slightly as she stretched her back. "The community center's basement took on 6 feet of water," she said between bites. "All our records, supplies for the after-school program, the food pantry, gone." Ethan frowned. "Insurance?" "Minimal. Flood insurance in a flood zone isn't exactly affordable." She sighed. "We'll rebuild. We always do. Just takes time we don't have and money we can't spare." Ethan considered her words carefully. "The Parker Foundation has emergency rebuilding grants. No strings attached. I could." "No." Her response was immediate and firm. "I appreciate the thought, but Riverside doesn't need charity." "It's not charity," Ethan countered. "It's resource allocation. You have needs, we have resources. The foundation exists specifically for situations like this." "And what does Parker Developments get out of it?" she challenged. "First aid for your conscience? Tax write-offs? Good PR before you buy up flood-damaged properties?" The accusation stung, but Ethan recognized the protective instinct behind it. The foundation and development company are separate entities. "But you're right to be suspicious. Too many people have probably come through here making promises they never intended to keep." Zora studied him, her expression softening slightly. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." He held her gaze. "Let me show you something." That evening, after cleanup concluded for the day, Ethan drove Zora to a small restaurant in a neighboring district, an unpretentious place with mismatched furniture, walls covered in local art, and delicious smells emanating from the kitchen. "Mabel's?" Zora looked surprised as they entered. "I've heard of this place, but never been. They're supposed to have the best jerk chicken in the city." "They do," Ethan confirmed, greeting the owner with a warm handshake. Mabel was one of the first recipients of a Parker Foundation small business grant 5 years ago. Over dinner, as Mabel herself brought them plate after plate of Caribbean specialties, Ethan explained how the foundation operated, providing grants to community organizations, small businesses, and emergency relief efforts, primarily in underserved neighborhoods. "Why?" Zora asked finally, the question she'd been circling all evening. "Why does someone like you care about communities like ours?" Ethan considered the question, knowing his answer mattered more than perhaps any business negotiation he'd ever conducted. "Because success means nothing if it doesn't create something meaningful," he said finally. "Because communities like Riverside are the backbone of this city, and they deserve better than they've gotten." "Pretty words," Zora challenged, but without malice. "But why should I believe them?" "You shouldn't," he replied simply. "Not just because I say them. Judge me by what I do, not what I say. That's all I ask." Something shifted in her expression, not trust, not yet, but openness to the possibility. "Fair enough." In the weeks that followed, Ethan became a fixture in Riverside's recovery efforts. He arrived most mornings in work clothes, spent hours on physical labor, and used his connections to expedite permits, source materials, and navigate bureaucratic obstacles. He never mentioned his wealth or position, but used both quietly to remove barriers that had long frustrated Zora's efforts. She, in turn, showed him her community's resilience and ingenuity. She introduced him to residents who'd lived in Riverside for generations, shared stories of past struggles and triumphs, corrected his misconceptions without condescension. One evening, as they took a break from rebuilding shelves at the community center, their hands brushed against each other. Instead of pulling away, Ethan gently took her fingers in his. For a moment, they stood frozen, the simple contact electric between them. "This is complicated," Zora whispered, looking at their joined hands. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "It is." Then he leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle question rather than a demand. She answered by moving closer, her free hand rising to rest against his chest. When they finally broke apart, something new and fragile had been acknowledged between them. Something neither had been looking for, but now couldn't imagine walking away from. Would you trust someone from a completely different world from yours? Or would you be suspicious of their motives? Drop your thoughts below and don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a good love story. Chapter 7. Ballroom chandeliers cast diamond patterns across the walls of the Grand Meridian Hotel. Crystal clinked against crystal as waiters in crisp black tie circulated with champagne. The annual Metropolitan Arts Foundation Gala represented everything Zora usually avoided: ostentatious wealth, performative philanthropy, and the subtle class signifiers designed to make outsiders feel precisely that, outside. Yet here she stood in a borrowed dress, midnight blue, simple but elegant, watching Ethan across the room as he conversed with gray-haired men in expensive suits. Despite her discomfort, she couldn't help admiring how he carried himself, confident but not arrogant, engaged but not ingratiating. "First time?" asked a warm, feminine voice beside her. Zora turned to find an elegant woman in her 60s observing her with kind, shrewd eyes. "Is it that obvious?" The woman laughed. "Only to someone who's been watching these events for 3 decades. I'm Patricia Thornton." Recognition flickered through Zora. "Ethan's mentor. He's mentioned you. All good things, I hope." Patricia's expression grew more thoughtful. "He's mentioned you as well. Quite frequently, in fact." Something in Patricia's tone made Zora look at her more carefully. "And that concerns you?" "On the contrary. I haven't seen him this engaged, this alive, in years." Patricia sipped her champagne. "But these waters can be treacherous to navigate, even for those born to them. For newcomers." She left the warning unspoken. Before Zora could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back in a gesture both protective and proud. "I see you've met Patricia," he said, smiling warmly at both women. "We were just getting acquainted," Patricia confirmed. "I was about to tell Ms. Washington how refreshing it is to see someone at one of these functions who actually works in the communities being discussed." Ethan's smile broadened. Zora's community center programming has become a model for other neighborhoods. The foundation is considering adopting several of her approaches citywide. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, warming Zora despite her discomfort in these surroundings. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps worlds could intersect, that barriers could be overcome. That moment shattered with the arrival of a woman who seemed to embody everything the gala represented, breathtaking in a designer gown that probably cost more than 6 months of Zora's rent, blonde hair swept into an immaculate updo, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. "Ethan, darling," the newcomer purred, air kissing his cheek while her eyes assessed Zora with clinical precision. "I've been looking everywhere for you. The Andersons were just asking about that property in the Marina District." "Olivia," Ethan acknowledged, his posture subtly stiffening. "I'd like you to meet Zora Washington." "Zora, this is Olivia Bennett." "The ex-girlfriend." Zora had heard the name but nothing specific about their relationship. She extended her hand politely. "Nice to meet you." Olivia took her hand with cool detachment. "Charmed. And what brings you to our little soiree? Are you with the catering staff?" The deliberate insult hung in the air. Patricia's eyebrows shot up, while Ethan's expression darkened dangerously. Zora met Olivia's gaze steadily. "Actually, I'm here as Ethan's guest. I run the Riverside Community Action Network." "Riverside?" Olivia's perfect eyebrows arched. "Wasn't that the area that flooded last month? Such a tragedy. Though I hear property values have absolutely plummeted. Opportunity knocks, I suppose." Ethan stepped forward. "Olivia." "It's all right," Zora interrupted, her voice calm despite the anger coursing through her. "Ms. Bennett is simply demonstrating why community-led development is so crucial. To prevent predatory interests from exploiting disasters." Patricia didn't quite hide her smile behind her champagne glass. Olivia's porcelain composure cracked just slightly before she recovered. "Well," she said with a brittle smile, "how passionate. Ethan has always had such a charitable nature." Her eyes flicked between them meaningfully. "Though usually his projects don't accompany him to events." Before either could respond, Olivia continued smoothly, "Do excuse me. I promised the Sinclairs I'd introduce them to the museum director." She glided away, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the sting of calculated cruelty. "I apologize for Olivia," Ethan said quietly, his hand finding Zora's. "She's exactly what I expected," Zora finished for him. Her voice remained steady, but her fingers had tensed in his. "I should find the ladies' room." As she walked away, she could hear Patricia speaking quietly but firmly to Ethan, "That woman is going to be a problem." In the elegant bathroom, Zora stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror. The dress looked beautiful, but suddenly she felt like a child playing dress-up. Every interaction since arriving had subtly reinforced the message Olivia had stated outright: she didn't belong here. More disturbingly, several guests had approached her with variations of the same conversation: how inspiring her work was, how generous Ethan was to take an interest, thinly veiled implications that she was a charity case rather than an equal partner. The bathroom door swung open, and a trio of women entered, their conversation halting briefly when they saw Zora before resuming at a slightly lower volume. Obviously a publicity move after the flood coverage. "Heard she's some kind of community organizer. David says the board is concerned about his judgment lately. Won't last. These rescue romances never do once reality sets in." Zora straightened her shoulders and walked past them with dignity intact, though each word had struck like a physical blow. Outside, she found Ethan waiting, concern evident in his expression. "Ready to leave?" he asked softly. "We just arrived," she protested weakly. "And we've already made the only impression that matters." He took her hand. "These people will talk regardless. Let's not give them the satisfaction of witnessing their effect." As they slipped out, neither noticed Olivia watching from across the room, phone in hand, her perfectly manicured finger tapping thoughtfully against its screen. The following morning, Zora's phone exploded with notifications. A Society columnist had published a piece about the gala, featuring a photo of Ethan and Zora with the headline, "Flood Romance, Parker Ayres Charity Begins at Home." The article was worse. Painting their relationship as a philanthropic curiosity, questioning Ethan's business judgment, and implying Zora was using the relationship to secure funding for her pet projects. When Ethan called, she let it go to voicemail. For the first time since they'd met, the distance between their worlds seemed not just wide, but unbridgeable. Chapter 8. Rain drummed against the windows of Zora's apartment, gentler than the storm that had first brought her and Ethan together, but a haunting reminder nonetheless. She sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by grant applications and budget spreadsheets, the harsh glow of her laptop illuminating the frown lines that had deepened over the past week. 3 unanswered calls from Ethan. 5 text messages. 1 elaborate flower arrangement that now wilted on her counter, its accompanying card, "Can we talk?" propped against a stack of bills. The newspaper article had been just the beginning. Since the gala, whispers had spread through Riverside like poison. Several community board members had questioned her judgment. A local activist blog had published a scathing piece titled, "Sleeping with the Enemy," when community leaders cozy up to developers. Even Darius had grown distant, his protective instincts flaring back to life. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She knew who it was before opening it. Only one person in her life knocked with such precise, measured confidence. Ethan stood in the hallway, raindrops beating on his jacket shoulders. Without his usual polished appearance, he looked tired, shadows beneath his eyes suggesting sleepless nights that matched her own. "You're not answering my calls," he said simply. She stepped back, allowing him to enter. "I've been busy." "Too busy for this?" The question held no accusation, only a sadness that made her chest ache. Zora closed the door and leaned against it, keeping space between them. "The rebuilding committee is questioning my objectivity. Darius barely speaks to me. Mrs. Coleman asked if I was getting special treatment from Parker Developments." She crossed her arms protectively. "So yes, maybe I've been too busy dealing with the fallout to answer your calls." Ethan winced. "I'm sorry about the article. Olivia has connections at that paper. She's vindictive." "The article isn't the problem, Ethan." Zora moved to the kitchen, needing movement to contain her emotions. "It just exposed the problem that was already there." "Which is what, exactly?" A hint of frustration edged into his voice. "This." She gestured between them. "Us. This impossible thing we're trying to make work across worlds that don't want to mix." "So you're giving up? Because some society columnist and your brother don't approve?" "It's not about approval," she countered. "It's about effectiveness. I can't help my community if they don't trust me. And they won't trust me if they think I've been compromised by my relationship with you." Ethan stepped closer. "Compromised. Interesting choice of words. You know what I mean." "I do." His jaw tightened. "You think I've somehow tainted you. That being with me undermines everything you stand for. That's not fair. Isn't it?" He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Since we met, I've shown up. I've worked alongside you. I've respected your leadership and your community's autonomy. What more do I need to do to prove I'm not the enemy?" The simple question landed like a blow because she had no good answer. He was right, he had done everything she could have asked and more. The problem wasn't his actions, it was what he represented in a world where wealth and power had historically been weapons used against communities like hers. "Maybe it's not about what you do," she said quietly. "Maybe it's about who you are. Who I am. The history we both carry that's bigger than either of us." "That's bullshit." The rare profanity from his usually controlled lips surprised her. "We're not archetypes, Zora. We're people. Complicated, imperfect people who found something real in the middle of a disaster. And maybe that's all it was meant to be," she whispered. "A moment. Not a future." Ethan's phone buzzed insistently. He ignored it until the third call in succession, finally glancing at the screen with a frown. "It's James from the Foundation. I need to take this." She nodded, grateful for the momentary reprieve from the intensity between them. "James, I'm in the middle of something personal," Ethan answered tersely. Then his expression changed, concern replacing frustration. "Slow down. What article?" Zora watched as his face darkened, his free hand clenching into a fist. "Send me the link." "Yes, now." He ended the call, already opening his email. "What is it?" she asked, alarm rising at his reaction. Without speaking, he handed her his phone. On the screen was an article from the city's largest news site, "Community leader accused of trading influence for development deals." Her stomach dropped as she read. The piece cited anonymous sources, claiming she had agreed to soften community opposition to several development projects in exchange for personal benefits, including romantic involvement with the CEO of Parker Developments. It included out-of-context quotes from her own grant applications and twisted her community advocacy into self-interest. This is insane," she whispered, hands shaking. "I've spent my life fighting predatory development." "It's Olivia," Ethan said grimly. "She's friends with the publisher's daughter." "You don't know that." "I do." His certainty was chilling. "This is how she operates. She did something similar to my former COO when she opposed a merger Olivia's father wanted." Zora set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. "It doesn't matter who did it. What matters is the damage." Her voice grew stronger as the shock faded into anger. "Everything I've worked for, my credibility, my relationships in the community, all questioned because I got involved with you." "We can fight this," Ethan insisted. "Issue a joint statement. Get the Parker Foundation legal team involved." "No." The word emerged with quiet finality. "No more teams, no more resources, no more fixing things for me. That's exactly what they're accusing me of benefiting from." "So what, then? You just allow these lies to stand?" "I'll handle it my way. On my own terms. The way I've always handled challenges." Ethan stared at her, disbelief warring with hurt in his expression. "You're shutting me out. When I could actually help, you're pushing me away. Can't you see?" Zora's control finally fractured, tears welling in her eyes. "Your help is the problem. Every time you swoop in with solutions, with resources, with connections I could never have on my own, it reinforces exactly what everyone believes, that I need saving. That I'm your project, not your partner." "That's not how I see you," he protested. "But it's how everyone else sees us. And now it's threatening everything I've worked for." The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken words and impossible choices. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low and controlled once more. "What do you want, Zora? Tell me what you want, and I'll do it." She lifted her gaze to his, love and regret mingling in equal measure. "I need space. I need to fix this on my own. I need us to take a step back." Something broke behind his eyes, but he nodded once, dignity intact. "If that's what you need." "It is." The words felt like glass in her throat. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "For what it's worth, I've never seen you as someone who needed saving. From the moment we met, you've been the strongest person I know." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Zora alone with the rain and the ruins of something precious neither of them had been prepared to protect. Have you ever had to choose between your heart and your principles? What did you choose? Share your story below and remember to subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Chapter 9. Autumn painted Riverside in shades of amber and rust. 3 weeks had passed since Zora and Ethan's painful separation, weeks in which she had thrown herself into community work with renewed fervor. Each day began before dawn and stretched well into the night: community meetings, grant writing sessions, rebuilding projects, legal consultations to fight the false accusations. The community center's renovation was nearly complete, its walls now a cheerful yellow instead of institutional beige, new computers humming in the education room, fresh shelves stocked with donated books and supplies. Zora stood in the center of the main room, clipboard in hand, checking off completed tasks with methodical precision. If she kept busy enough, worked hard enough, perhaps the hollow ache beneath her ribs would eventually subside. "You're running yourself into the ground," Darius said from the doorway. His tone held no judgment, only the weary concern of someone who recognized self-destructive patterns from personal experience. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. "Just focused." "Focused on avoiding," he corrected, stepping into the room. "I know the signs, sis. I've watched you do this since Mom died. She stiffened. This isn't the same thing. Isn't it? Darius leaned against a freshly painted wall. Loss is loss. Whether it's someone dying or someone walking away. He didn't walk away, Zora said quietly. I asked him to leave. Darius studied her, his expression softening. Why? The simple question pierced through her carefully constructed defenses. You know why. The article. The accusations. I was losing credibility with the very people I'm trying to help. That's what you tell yourself, Darius acknowledged. But I'm asking my sister, not the community organizer. Why did you push away someone who made you happier than I've seen you in years? Zora set down the clipboard, suddenly too tired to maintain the pretense. Because it was easier than waiting for it all to fall apart later. Because people like us don't get fairy tales with happy endings, especially not with people like him. People like him, Darius repeated. You mean people who show up when it counts? People who work alongside us without complaint? People who see you, really see you? She looked at her brother in surprise. Since when are you on Team Ethan? You were the one warning me to be careful. Yeah, well, maybe watching him these past weeks changed my mind. What do you mean, watching him? He hasn't been here. Darius raised an eyebrow. You think those emergency rebuilding grants came through because of your persuasive grant writing? The expedited permits? The construction materials that mysteriously appeared exactly when we needed them? Confusion furrowed her brow. The foundation has been working behind the scenes at his direction, Darius confirmed. Making sure our community gets what it needs without his name attached. Because he knew your reputation was on the line. The revelation left her momentarily speechless. All this time, she'd believed Ethan had simply respected her request for space. Instead, he'd found a way to help without undermining her autonomy or attaching strings to his assistance. And you know what else? Darius continued. That article attacking you? The newspaper printed a retraction last week. Full page. With an apology. What? How? Apparently, the publisher received evidence that the sources were fabricated. Something about recorded conversations and email trails leading back to social circles with agendas. Darius smiled slightly. The kind of evidence that only someone with serious connections and resources could obtain. Zora sank into a nearby chair, mind racing. Why didn't he tell me? For the same reason he's helped without taking credit. He understood what you needed, to stand on your own, to protect what you've built. Darius's voice grew gentler. The question is, do you understand what you need? Not the community organizer. Not Mom's daughter. You. Across town, in the sterile luxury of his penthouse apartment, Ethan sat alone at his dining table. Spreadsheets and financial projections lay untouched beside him, his attention focused instead on a simple ceramic mug. Handmade, slightly lopsided, with a pattern of intricate swirls glazed in deep blue. Zora had given it to him weeks ago, a thank you gift from an elderly potter in Riverside whose studio had been restored after the flood. So you don't forget where your fancy coffee came from, she'd teased. From the earth, shaped by someone's hands. Patricia found him like that when she arrived for their scheduled meeting, staring at the mug as if it contained answers rather than cold coffee. I can come back, she offered, noting his distraction. No. Ethan straightened, attempting to reclaim his usual focus. I'm sorry. The Robinson development proposal can wait, Patricia interrupted, taking the seat opposite him. What can't wait is addressing whatever has turned my brilliant protégé into a walking ghost. Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Dramatic as always, Patricia. Observant as always, she corrected. You've done remarkable work these past weeks. The Foundation's emergency response has been exemplary. Parker Development's numbers are strong. You're functioning perfectly. But you're not living. You're going through motions. She nodded toward the mug. You miss her. The simple truth, spoken aloud, seemed to deflate him. It doesn't matter. She made her choice. Based on circumstances that no longer exist, Patricia pointed out. The article has been retracted. Her community has rallied around her. Even her skeptical brother has been singing your praises to anyone who'll listen. Ethan looked up sharply. You've spoken to Darius? I make it my business to know things, Patricia replied with a small shrug. Especially when they concern people I care about. She needed space. And you've given it. But space doesn't mean forever, unless you both let it. Ethan's fingers traced the rim of the mug. I don't know if there's a way forward for us. The world keeps trying to tell us we don't belong together. Since when, Patricia asked with arch disbelief, has Ethan Parker ever cared what the world thinks he should do? Chapter 10. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the renovated community center was scheduled for noon, but Zora arrived at dawn. She needed these quiet moments alone in the space before it filled with people and activity. Her fingers trailed along freshly painted walls, smooth new countertops, refurbished floors that gleamed in the early morning light streaming through windows that no longer leaked. The transformation was remarkable. What had once been a tired building held together by determination and duct tape was now a vibrant hub ready to serve Riverside for decades to come. Every detail reflected careful planning and quality materials, yet maintained the character and spirit that made it the heart of the community. You did it, came a voice from behind her. Zora turned to find Mrs. Coleman watching her from the entrance, the elderly woman's eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. We all did it, Zora corrected gently. The entire community. Mrs. Coleman shuffled forward, her cane tapping lightly on the polished concrete floor. Yes, but you led us here. Just like your mama would have. She reached the center of the room and looked around with evident satisfaction. Though I suspect you had help from that young man of yours, too. Heat rose to Zora's cheeks. We haven't spoken in weeks. Haven't needed to speak to help, has he? Mrs. Coleman's shrewd eyes fixed on Zora. Some men talk pretty and do nothing. Others say little but move mountains quietly. Seems to me you found one of the rare ones. Before Zora could respond, Mrs. Coleman had reached into her large handbag and pulled out a folded newspaper. Third page, she said, handing it over. I'll be back for the ceremony. Alone again, Zora unfolded the paper. The business section carried a small but prominent article. Parker Developments establishes Community Oversight Board for all new projects. The piece detailed how the company had created a revolutionary new structure ensuring communities affected by development would have meaningful input and veto power over aspects of projects in their neighborhoods. The board would include representatives from various community organizations, with special emphasis on historically underserved areas. An accompanying photo showed Ethan at the press conference, looking simultaneously professional and somehow vulnerable. A quote from him jumped out at her: "Sustainable development isn't just about environmental impact. It's about human impact. We've been getting that wrong for too long. This is a step toward getting it right." She was still standing there, paper in hand, when Darius arrived an hour later with the sound system for the ceremony. "You saw it," he observed, noting the newspaper. "Why didn't he tell me he was doing this?" The question emerged softer than she intended. Darius set down the speakers before answering. "Maybe for the same reason you didn't tell him you've been defending him to every skeptic in the neighborhood. Pride. Fear. The stubborn belief that you have to handle everything alone." His words struck uncomfortably close to home. She had been defending Ethan, to community members, to other organizers, even to journalists who called for comments on the retraction. Yet she hadn't reached out to the man himself, held back by the same fear that had prompted their separation. The ceremony unfolded beautifully. Crowds gathered, speeches were given, the ribbon was cut to enthusiastic applause. Zora moved through it all in a dream state, her thoughts elsewhere. It wasn't until the formal events concluded and she found herself alone in the small office, her office, that reality fully returned. A knock on the door frame pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up, expecting Darius or perhaps a community member. Instead, Ethan stood in the doorway, hesitation evident in his stance. For a moment, neither spoke. "I wasn't planning to come," he finally said. "I didn't want to overshadow your moment." "But you did come," she replied softly. "I needed to see you." The simple honesty in his voice broke something open inside her. He stepped into the office but kept a respectful distance. "Your speech was beautiful. Everything you've done here is extraordinary." "I saw the newspaper," Zora said, reaching for the folded copy on her desk. "Why didn't you tell me about the oversight board?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Would you have believed my motives were pure if I had?" The question hit her with unexpected force. Would she have? Or would she have seen it as another attempt to solve problems with money, to play the savior? "I've been afraid," she admitted, the words feeling like pebbles in her throat. "Afraid of losing myself in your world. Afraid of becoming dependent. Afraid that what we had wasn't real." "And I've been afraid too," Ethan confessed, taking a tentative step closer. "Afraid you only saw my resources, not me. Afraid I'd never be enough without my money. Afraid I'd somehow corrupt what makes you so, you." Zora's eyes filled with tears. "That day in the flood, when you found me, I wasn't looking for a rescue." "I know that now," he said. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You don't need saving. But maybe we both need each other." The space between them felt electric, charged with truth long unspoken. "My mother died because she couldn't afford proper healthcare," Zora said suddenly. "She worked 3 jobs, raised me and Darius alone, gave everything to this community. And when she needed help most, the system failed her." She drew a shaky breath. "That's why I fight so hard. Why I refuse to depend on anyone. Why I was so terrified of what I felt for you." Ethan's eyes never left hers. "I built a company because numbers made sense when people didn't. I thought success would fill the emptiness." He shook his head. "Until I met you, I didn't understand what was missing." Step by step, they closed the distance between them. "I don't want to fix your life," he said. "I want to be part of it. Your strength, your community, your passion, they're not things to change. They're why I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. "And your determination, your generosity, your willingness to learn, they're why I love you," Zora whispered back. When they finally embraced, it wasn't with the desperate passion of their earlier romance, but with the steady certainty of 2 people who had found their way home through the storm. "We're different," Ethan acknowledged, his forehead resting against hers. "Yes," Zora agreed. "And that's our strength, not our weakness." Outside, the sounds of the community celebrating drifted through the window, a perfect backdrop to their new beginning. Chapter 11. 3 months after their reconciliation, Zora found herself standing in a conference room at Parker Developments, watching as Ethan presented their joint vision to a group of potential donors and community leaders. The slideshow behind him displayed a simple but powerful logo, the Helena Washington Foundation, named after Zora's mother. "What we're proposing isn't charity," Ethan was saying, his confidence tempered with the genuine humility she'd come to treasure in him. "It's a partnership between resources and knowledge. Between capital and community wisdom. Between what should be done and how it can be done effectively." Zora studied the faces around the room. Darius sat near the front, his expression betraying both pride and lingering vigilance. He had become the Foundation's community outreach director, bringing his practical knowledge of Riverside's needs to the planning table. Next to him sat Patricia Thornton, Ethan's longtime mentor, who had surprised everyone with her enthusiastic support and considerable business acumen. The Foundation's mission was elegantly simple: to create sustainable infrastructure and healthcare solutions in underserved communities, with those communities maintaining decision-making power throughout the process. It was everything Zora had fought for, but with resources she could never have imagined. The key difference in our approach, Zora stepped forward to explain, comfortable now in this room of power and privilege, is that we don't arrive with predetermined solutions. We begin with listening. A distinguished gentleman in the back raised his hand. And how do you ensure communities have the expertise to make technical decisions about infrastructure? That's precisely why this is a partnership, Ethan answered. We provide technical expertise and resources, but the community provides context and priorities. Both are essential. Zora added, we're also establishing training programs so community members can develop the technical skills themselves. The goal isn't perpetual dependence on outside experts, but building capacity within communities. The presentation continued, with questions growing increasingly supportive as the vision became clear. By the end, commitments had exceeded their initial funding goals by nearly 40%. As the room cleared, Patricia approached them, a rare smile softening her usually stern features. When you first told me about this, Ethan, I thought your judgment was clouded by personal feelings. She glanced approvingly at Zora. I've never been happier to be proven wrong. Once they were alone, Ethan pulled Zora into an embrace. Your mother would be proud, he whispered against her hair. Sometimes I think she orchestrated all of this, Zora admitted. The storm, our meeting, everything. Later that week, they held the first official board meeting of the Helena Washington Foundation in the newly renovated community center. The board's composition reflected their commitment to balanced representation, half community members, half business and technical experts. Darius had prepared an ambitious agenda, starting with plans for a mobile healthcare clinic that would serve not just Riverside but neighboring communities as well. The discussion was vibrant, occasionally contentious, but always respectful, exactly as they had hoped. During a break, Zora stepped outside for fresh air and found herself face-to-face with an unexpected visitor, Olivia Bennett. I thought I might find you hiding from all the adoration, Olivia said, her tone still carrying traces of its former edge but lacking real malice. Just getting some air, Zora replied evenly. I'm surprised to see you here. Olivia shrugged one elegant shoulder. Professional curiosity. The Bennett Foundation might be interested in collaborative opportunities. She paused, studying Zora with new consideration. I was wrong about you. That's surprisingly forthright. I'm not apologizing, Olivia clarified quickly. Just acknowledging that what you and Ethan have built here is impressive. Not what I expected. Before Zora could respond, the door opened and Ethan appeared. His momentary surprise at seeing Olivia quickly gave way to cautious politeness. Olivia was just expressing interest in potential collaboration, Zora explained. Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. That would be unexpected. The best partnerships often are, Olivia replied with a ghost of her former smile. Look at you two. The Foundation's opening ceremony, held on the one-year anniversary of the flood that had changed everything, brought together people from every walk of life. The governor came, as did celebrities drawn by Patricia's extensive connections. But the heart of the event was the Riverside community itself, proud participants rather than grateful recipients. The ceremony culminated with the unveiling of a memorial garden dedicated to Helena Washington and all those who had fought for community justice before resources made success possible. As dusk fell and lights illuminated the garden paths, Zora found herself standing between worlds, the privileged donors in cocktail attire mingling with community members in their Sunday best, all united by a shared vision. Look what we've created together, Ethan said, appearing at her side and lacing his fingers through hers. Zora squeezed his hand. No. Look what we're still creating. Chapter 12. You're overthinking it again, Mrs. Coleman chided gently, adjusting the delicate lace veil in Zora's hair. The flowers are perfect. The music is perfect. And that man waiting for you out there? He thinks you're perfect even when you're covered in flood mud and yelling at him. Zora laughed, the sound easing some of the tension in her shoulders. The wedding preparations had become an unexpected bridge between worlds, a beautiful merging of traditions and expectations that reflected their journey together. They had chosen to hold the ceremony in Riverside Park, the same place where they had first exchanged meaningful words after the rescue. Now transformed by the Foundation's first beautification project, the park bloomed with native flowers and sturdy trees that would stand against future storms. "Did I tell you what Ethan did?" Zora asked, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. A stunning creation that combined modern elegance with subtle nods to her mother's cultural heritage. "Which thoughtful thing?" "There have been so many," Mrs. Coleman replied with a knowing smile. Instead of the traditional registry, he suggested donations to expand the mobile clinic program. Zora's voice softened. And when his board members insisted on giving lavish gifts anyway, he asked them all for community investment pledges instead. A knock at the door preceded Darius's entrance. Her brother stood tall in his tailored suit, emotion making his usually steady voice rough. "It's time, Z." He paused, taking in the sight of her. "Mom would be." He couldn't finish. "I know," Zora whispered, embracing him. "I feel her here today." The ceremony itself was a harmonious blend of formality and warmth. Guests filled both sides of the aisle, Ethan's business associates and social connections on one side, Riverside residents and community activists on the other. Yet as the day had progressed, the invisible line between these worlds had blurred, with conversations and connections forming across supposed boundaries. Patricia Thornton sat in the front row where a mother of the groom might typically be, her usual businesslike demeanor softened by genuine joy. Across the aisle, Mrs. Coleman represented the surrogate family that had helped raise Zora after her mother's passing. When Ethan first caught sight of Zora walking toward him on Darius's arm, the naked emotion on his face brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic guests. Here was a man completely undone by love, with no pretense or reserve. Their vows, written together over late-night conversations, acknowledged both the unlikely beginning of their relationship and the intentional work of building it. "I promise to never rescue you," Ethan vowed, causing knowing laughter among those familiar with their story, "but to stand beside you in every storm, knowing your strength is not diminished by my support." "I promise to build with you," Zora responded, her voice clear and steady, "not just a home or a foundation, but a life where our differences multiply our strengths rather than divide us." The reception unfolded in the community center, transformed for the evening into an elegant yet welcoming space. Crystal chandeliers hung above tables where corporate executives sat elbow to elbow with community organizers, finding unexpected common ground. Darius's toast brought the room to hushed attention. "When Ethan Parker first pulled my sister from rising floodwaters, I was certain it was the beginning of a rescue story, one where the rich man saves the day and expects gratitude ever after." He smiled at the couple. "I've never been happier to be wrong." What I witnessed instead was two people rescuing each other from lives that looked complete on the surface but weren't. Two people brave enough to let a storm wash away their preconceptions and rebuild something stronger together. Patricia's toast followed, her business acumen giving way to surprising sentimentality. "In 30 years of mentoring executives, I've never seen transformation like I've witnessed in Ethan. Not because he changed who he is, but because he finally found someone who helped him become who he was always meant to be." As the evening drew to a close, Ethan and Zora slipped away from the celebration to the small garden dedicated to Helena Washington. There, among night-blooming flowers and the gentle sound of water, they shared a private moment. "This isn't an ending," Zora murmured against his shoulder. "No," Ethan agreed, his arms tightening around her. "It's the continuation of something that started with a storm and will last long after today's perfect weather is forgotten." Above them, stars emerged in a clear sky, nature's blessing on a love that had weathered its worst and emerged stronger.